President Trump is pushing to broker a ceasefire between Russia and Ukraine. But after a nearly 2-hour phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, challenges remain.
This is definitely not the outcome that Trump was hoping for from the call. He had got the Ukrainians to agree to a 30-day full ceasefire in the air, on the seas, along the battlefield in Ukraine, and he expected Putin to reciprocate. Putin had said, actually a few days earlier, that he is willing in principle to agree to a ceasefire if a bunch of issues were ironed out. But I think Trump definitely hoped, especially in a 2-hour call with Putin, to get some kind of agreement for this ultimately at the end of the call, and he didn't get that.
During the call, Putin agreed to halt attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
But just this morning we saw an overnight Russia and Ukraine exchanged attacks on each other, which suggests that ceasefire is not as immediate as the Kremlin readout may have suggested.
Despite saying he supports peace, so far, Putin has stopped short of accepting a full, immediate ceasefire.
Putin's certainly playing the long game here. He understands that the longer he drags those negotiations out, the more land his military can take in Ukraine, because it's moving forward and because Ukraine is very much under pressure in terms of the manpower that it can bring to the fight and the weapons that it can bring to the fight, because deliveries from the West are not as robust and regular as they used to be. And so for Putin, this is ultimately a chance to gain more territory that he will keep in any peace deal.
Since his inauguration, most of Trump's pressure has been directed at Ukraine. Washington cut off military aid and intelligence sharing to Kyiv after a contentious Oval Office meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky.
Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
After Kyiv agreed to a 30-day ceasefire, the US restored aid.
It definitely doesn't seem like the US is applying the same amount of pressure on Russia to come to the negotiating table and agree to a ceasefire. But the main reason for that is, of course, that Russia is not dependent on the US in the way that Ukraine is.
Zelensky said Ukraine supports all steps to ending the war and has criticised Putin for not agreeing to an unconditional ceasefire.
Було за ніч 150 дронів, в тому числі по об'єктах енергетики. Удари були по транспорту, удари були, вражено було, на жаль, 2 лікарні по звичайній міській інфраструктурі. Тобто слова Путіна дуже розходяться з реальністю.
Well, Ukraine is incredibly cautious during this whole process. It's incredibly cautious of any calls between the US and Russia. They're very, very worried and concerned that some kind of deal about Ukraine may be hashed out directly between the US and Russia, that there may be a meeting between Putin and Trump where they sit in a room for 4 hours and agree to divide Ukraine up, giving Russia a very large amount of what it already controls in the country, and perhaps even more. So Ukraine is very, very concerned about this. Zelensky is constantly trying to put pressure on Trump to keep him informed of his conversations with Putin.
The White House described the call as the first step in a movement to peace.
Russia has been angling for closer relations with the US ever since Trump was inaugurated. Putin saw Trump as an opportunity to bring Russia in from the cold, end its isolation on the international stage that the Biden administration was very instrumental in putting into effect. And the US and Russian delegations that met in Saudi Arabia on 2 occasions now, trying to hash out some kind of economic deals and closer cooperation, including in the space sphere between the two countries. This is something that for Russia is very, very important. Its economy is suffering, and it most importantly, and this is something that Putin has made clear on many occasions, wants to get Western sanctions lifted, the sanctions that were placed in Russia because of its invasion of Ukraine. So this would be a very, very big win for Russia.
Trump has said he would deploy additional sanctions on Russia if it doesn't agree to a ceasefire. But he has also kept his eye on bigger prizes.
Trump has made very, very clear from even before his inauguration during the election campaign that ending this war in Ukraine is a big priority for him. He wants to be seen as a peacemaker. He wants to be seen as the president who is ending the wars that the US is involved in. So it would be a very big win for the US to get this ended, take the strain off economies in Europe that have suffered from this, and collaterally the US as well. And I think ultimately he sees this as freeing his hand to perhaps turn to the most important issue on the international stage for the US, which is kind of parrying a resurgent China.
Analysts suggest that even though the call didn't bring an immediate peace deal, that doesn't mean one won't come later.
I think it's a signal from the Russians that they can be brought down a peg from their incredibly impossible position, the impossible demands of Ukraine to essentially capitulate and come again under Russia's sphere of influence. So it is an indication that the Russians can be made to change their position in the country, but I think ultimately we're very, very far away still from any end to the war.